Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR. I'm George Binns, and this evening we're going to talk a little bit about additions to the system where we have a new advocate of people who are victims of domestic violence, Ross Steinborn.
Thank you for having me.
So, you're the new kid on the block. You're taking over the sort of system. You're not a police officer.
Correct.
You're a city employee, a civilian.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Okay. How do you work with the police department?
So my role with the police department is I'm able to look over any domestic violence calls, whether that's that leads to an arrest or leads to charges or doesn't. A lot of times our calls come in as like a verbal dispute only.
Yeah.
And my mornings consist of going through that log, seeing what has happened over the previous night, over the weekend, and then part of my role is following up with the victims in that. And so,
Well, how big an operation is this? How many calls do you normally look at?
I think it varies. Some coming on like Mondays obviously are busier than just an overnight.
Yeah.
But I would say it's a so far. Let me put it this way: I've been keeping track of calls that I've been like making out to folks, and I'm in like the 60 or 70 calls right now, or people I've worked with or reached out to since April when I started.
So that's not too bad,
No.
but it's not good either.
Right.
You know, you look at the national statistics, and it gets to be horrible. You're talking into the millions.
Yeah.
Yeah, this kind of thing. So, the police get a 911 call usually?
911, or if someone comes into the department, or they call the police business line and say they want to report something. Maybe it's after the fact. So a decent amount of like restraining order violations, which a lot of times those happen like after the fact. The victim comes in and says, "Hey, this is what happened." So it's not necessarily 911. Those do happen from time to time.
So it can be any one of several different ways to get the message to you that somebody has been abused.
Right. Yeah.
And then what?
So, however, if someone's getting in touch with me, I think an important fact to say here too is like it doesn't have to be police referral. So I could just get a phone call from on the domestic violence line. I've gotten referrals from the local colleges in the past already. So it doesn't have to be from the police department. So far, that seems to be the major way.
Oh, yeah.
But that's not necessary. So it kind of just is, the reports come in, or I get contact with a victim or a survivor, and I reach out or usually make a phone call, let them know that this position exists, that I'm there as a resource, and then we kind of go from what is that person looking for? What kind of resources are they looking for? A lot of times, that tends to be kind of legal help, either navigating the criminal justice system if charges were brought, which is something that I do, or helping somebody get a restraining order if that's one, if they don't already have one.
Now, you surprised me with the calls from the colleges. What kind of...
I mean, not to get into too many details, but the colleges both have, the two in the area, all colleges should have a Title IX coordinator, which is a person who investigates dating violence or sexual assault on college campuses.
Yeah.
And sometimes it makes sense, especially if the students involved are leaving college, if they're finishing up their career there, to reach out for other resources and to have some other things in place outside of what the college can put on. So, so it was just the Title IX investigator.
Okay. What's Title IX?
Title IX is the federal statute that says that gives colleges the ability to punish people for on campus for domestic and sexual violence that happens on campus.
So when somebody has one of these events, they give you a call. You call them. Either they call you or the police department alerts you that there's been an event. You get a phone number. You call somebody. do you ever actually go out and visit them?
Every now and then we go out and I'll go out and visit. I do like to set up meetings if it's not me going out to visit on site. Because a lot of times when I go on site, I need to bring an officer with me. So sometimes instead of that option, which is definitely an option if it's an emergency or somebody just really wants me to come out right away, I will often set up a meeting with somebody. So,
Well, we've had discussions before about how this operation works and what kind of additional support's available.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the issues keeps coming up, and you see it in the national news as well, is, all right, you send a couple of cops out because somebody's beating up on his wife or something, or on the kids, and they get into a physical involvement with them, and things get to be very nasty very quickly. And there is an argument that, well, if you send out a social worker, then it automatically de-escalates the encounter.
yeah, I could see an argument for that. Currently, that's not the way the position is operating,
No.
and partly because just being in this field for a long time, and I think any officer would also tell you, is domestic calls are you just never know what you're going to get, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so there's a lot of unknowns, and that unknowns means a lot of danger
Yeah.
in domestic calls. And so I think, at least for the time being, making sure that the police are the main response, the officers are the main responders to domestic violence calls, and many of them do a fantastic job. They're training and have been trained to de-escalate situations, to figure out, to hear from both parties on what's kind of going on, and to really read a situation well. So, and that's been my experience so far at the Beverly PD.
I had a discussion with the chief one time, and he was telling me about way back when he was a patrolman, he got into a domestic violence call, and he's got the guy constrained, and whonk in the back of the head, the wife.
The wife hit him.
Yeah, so all of a sudden, instead of rescuing her,
Yeah.
so I understand what you're saying, that these things can turn around very quickly. And I mean, this is one of the arguments that people get into about, okay, you're having a free-for-all, the neighbors hear the noise, they call, somebody calls, and police show up, and instantly it becomes a confrontation because too many people, I don't know whether they watch TV or read the wrong kind of comic books or something, but they get into one of these confrontations, and the issue keeps coming down to how do you de-escalate it? And I think the point you're making, that the police are trained to do it.
Yeah, so separating the parties. So immediately, I think if you find yourself in a situation where the police are called for domestic violence, whether it's someone in your household called or a neighbor called, you're going to find that the police are going to want to separate the parties, make sure everyone's safe right away, and then spend time questioning both parties to kind of figure out what went down, why they were called.
Yeah, and one of the issues that comes up is, do you, quote, de-escalate the situation? Everybody looks calm, the police walk out, and the free-for-all starts all over again.
Yes.
So we get to sometime into the issue of you got to move somebody out.
Right. And that's that's actually one of the reasons why, in some respects, a civilian in this role can be a little bit helpful. So if officers go to a call and there's any physical complaint of any kind of physical domestic situation, then the law states that police shall arrest. It's actually the only statute, and to my knowledge, that an officer must make an arrest if there's signs of or claims of physical violence. So if both parties are saying it was only verbal, we were in an argument, they might ask, in that situation, they'll often ask somebody, do you have somewhere else you can go stay for the night? and they'll leave it at that if there's no claims of physical violence. But as soon as there's claims of any kind of physical contact, then they are making an arrest.
They have no choice.
Correct.
It's a mandatory.
Yeah. And that's why, as a civilian, it's nice because when I call or when I make contact with people, I'm not under those same constraints, so I can talk to victims or potential victims and really get a sense of what the relationship's like, what they're looking for. And if a police report seems reasonable, if a complaint seems reasonable, then I can kind of be a warm handoff to an officer to make that report.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you can then advise the officer, there was physical contact. You got to make an arrest. You got to get him out of here or get her out of here, whoever's the instigator.
I don't know that I make the request. I say, hey, you know what? I think that there's a report. I tell the victim, we can make a report here, and it sounds like from what you're telling me that there might possibly be charges, and then we take that, and the officer kind of decides those things.
Well, when you're suggesting that somebody is there someplace else you can go, it sounds like that applies to the victim. Get the victim out of the house.
Not always. I think it kind of depends on the situations. In fact, I would say most of the time when I'm reading reports where that's happening and they're asking someone to leave, it's usually not the complainant. It's usually the other person who they are like, can you find somewhere else to sleep tonight?
Yeah. So after you have one of these events and you get the report the day after, you make a phone call, what kind of support can you provide to both parties?
Yeah, so I'm almost always working with the alleged victim in the case, especially if there's criminal charges brought.
Yeah.
That can be anything from legal aid, and I'm not a lawyer, so it's not like representation, but I can be there as a kind of a moral support, either to do a 209A or a restraining order.
What's a 209A?
So a 209A is the jargon that we call a restraining order in Massachusetts against a person that you're in a romantic relationship with, a familiar relationship with. So I can help them apply for that, and I can usually actually go up and stand up with them, even though I can't address the court directly. I do one-on-one emotional support. I'm not a licensed counselor, so I'm not doing therapy with somebody, but I can do that kind of one-on-one emotional support, see what they're kind of needing, and kind of go from there. I can do some warm handoffs for housing support. And if victims are struggling with a substance abuse, that's stuff I can do warm handoffs with as well, which happens from time to time. And so those are kind of the big ones.
So you're like a traffic director.
A little bit, in some ways, yeah.
Look at the problem and which way do you want to go, and
absolutely, yeah.
Who do you talk to? Where do you get help?
These are our hear the problem. Really do a lot of time listening to the survivor, seeing what they want to do and offering them options and kind of exploring those options with them. Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, we take a hypothetical case that some guy's been beaten on his wife. The police come because made physical contact, got to arrest him.
Yep.
They take him away. Okay. He will most likely get jail time?
It's going to depend on the history of the relationship, the severity of was this victim physically harmed. If the victim went to the hospital with serious injuries, then that's a very different charge than he pushed her out of the way or something. So there's going to be some determining factors. But if it's kind of I use this term, for lack of a better term, if it's kind of a simple assault and battery, there's no physical injuries, there's no weapon used, then the person would probably be released from the court the next day, maybe on a GPS, probably with conditions to stay away and to have no contact with that victim. If they had run-ins in the past, this wasn't the first time this had happened, or there were some of those extenuating circumstances, then the person may be held the next day pending trial.
Yeah.
More likely than not, they're getting out, though, the next day.
Yeah. So let's assume it's a fairly simple case and first time, and they're getting out. What kind of support's available for them?
Yeah, so that's when we would be talking, and the night of the arrest, the officers would also be handing the victim a 209A rights form. So this goes over the rights with the victim on site.
Yeah.
And then I would, which also walks through the process of getting a restraining order.
Yeah.
And then because it's an arrest, I would see it and probably make the call pretty early, because the person's probably going to be arraigned the very next day in court.
Yeah.
So I'd try to make contact pretty quickly, and would also advise the person to get a restraining order. If the person wants a restraining order and the defendant was arrested, that's like a good time to go, because you often don't need the 10-day. So a restraining order process goes like, say I want a restraining order against my partner. I walk in to the court. Sorry, I hit the mic. I walk into the court, and I fill out an affidavit. The court hears me, but the defendant's not there, right? So the court says, based on what you wrote, we're going to give you an emergency restraining order. It's a 10-day order. In those 10 days, we're going to serve the defendant, and then we're going to be back here in 10 days for a two-party hearing. And that's when the actual decision will be made, whether or not the restraining order is going to be extended. And they're usually extended, if they are, for 6 months to a year.
Yeah.
At that point. Well, if the person was arrested and they can serve him or her and do that hearing on the day of the arraignment, that becomes kind of a better option. So we try to, if somebody's really interested in getting a restraining order, we try to do that same day if the person was arrested.
Yeah. So they get a permanent restraining order for 6 months, a year.
A year.
Yeah, kind of thing. And get back to the issue of you've got this perpetrator who has been arrested and so forth. What kind of help can you give him or her?
In my position, if they were to reach out, I would certainly have a conversation with somebody saying like, hey, I want to get help.
Yeah.
I would certainly have that conversation. Generally speaking, domestic violence agencies aren't, by their own funding, aren't often allowed to work with defendants. But I don't, as of right now, in my knowledge, I don't know that I have that same constraint. I probably would do like warm handoffs to they don't call them this anymore, but like batters intervention programs. I now forget what they're called, but I know those exist and they have a new name. So
Yeah. What do you mean by a warm handoff, by the way?
I would probably make the contact. So instead of saying, hey, call this number, I would call, figure out who they should talk to, and let them know that it's coming, that this person reaching out is coming, as opposed to just saying, you need to reach out to these people on your own. I would try to do a little bit of background work to make sure it was okay and that it was happening.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we get to the situation where there is help available for both sides of the free-for-all. And is there any follow-up to see, hey, did you go? Did you take the class? Did you attend the sessions?
For the abuser, I don't know. It's not something that's happened so far.
Yeah.
And once a court, and like again, this probably changes quite a lot once they're arrested. I don't know what, because there's charges, the court says, there's probable cause that this person abused this other person.
Yeah.
I'm not sure kind of what kind of access they would have to me at that point. But if someone came to me and said like, hey, I get really angry or something with my partner and I'm scared that like I'm going to harm them. At that point, I could probably work with them. But once there's charges, there's probably little access to my services.
When you say you would work with them, like you mentioned earlier, you're not a licensed therapist or anything. It's just casual.
It would again be that kind of listening session.
Yeah.
What's your concerns? What are your options at this point? Those sorts of things.
So you could point them in directions that
Right.
there's certain, I don't know what you would call them, organizations that help people have substance abuse is the obvious one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would imagine there'd be other for other kinds of emotional problems that get
Yeah,
get
so
out of hand.
if we could pin down what the issue was, if it was substance abuse is an exacerbating thing. So I wouldn't say substance abuse is a cause of domestic violence, but it definitely somebody who's predisposed to that and also has substance abuse issues, that becomes an underlying factor. But
Yeah. So this operation has been going on within the Beverly Police Department for maybe
I want to say since '02.
'02. Yeah. So so it's not something that you're just inventing today.
Right.
So it's got a history, it's got a track record kind of thing. And as you develop this program, what are you going to do different?
I knew my predecessor. I knew her very well, and we used to work together when I was in a different role. And she did a fantastic job with clients. And I really hope to kind of just build that, continue to build that trust. The position's been open for like 8 months after her departure. So kind of getting things back on track to where they were and building up that trust in the community again is kind of my main point. My own personal background in the field is a little bit more geared towards prevention and education than my predecessors was. And so if I do anything different, it'll probably be trying to spend some time focused on prevention, education, community awareness stuff.
There's something called the Community Advisory Board.
There's hopefully going to be something called the Community Advisory Board, yeah.
Did we have one and it disbanded, or is this brand new?
This is a new initiative for me.
So who do you want as part of this board? How do you get people involved?
Yeah, so I've started sending out invites, and I've been meeting in the background with some folks from City Connect. I've reached out to some of the city councilors. So I'm hoping for it to be a pretty broad, some just like citizens, but I'm hoping for it to be a pretty broad group that's really kind of focused on community advocacy, thinking about domestic violence prevention, awareness, and education, kind of on a holistic community level, where some touch points where we can easily reach people, where are some things we could develop more long term. Cindy Baez, who's my predecessor, used to do a great job in October, which is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, of doing some events with the North Shore Music Theater. And doing some things with City Hall. So maintaining and growing those would be part of this board's
What kind of people are you looking for to be on this board? Who should volunteer?
Yeah. So if domestic violence and honestly, to a certain degree, if just relationships are something that you're passionate about, figuring out how to make and how to have healthy relationships. And thinking about a problem on a community level, if those are things you're interested in. If you have an experience of domestic violence, it's totally welcomed as well. Any of that really. It's kind of open. I mean, right now it's not well defined because I'm still working out like who does show up, who does want to be involved, and I think those people who show up in the end will really define what the board does and is.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I've had discussions with the president of the city council, and her day job is a minister, and a lot of times she gets involved with counseling. Is that the kind of work that you're expecting these people to be doing?
Not necessarily, although Julie Flowers is somebody I've already reached out to. So they don't necessarily need to be involved in the field. I think concerned citizens, definitely people that we could. There actually are some. I'm not reinventing the wheel. So there's Wakefield and Melrose have the Wakefield Alliance Against Violence and the Melrose Alliance Against Violence, and they're well established. They started, I think both of them now are their own entities or their own nonprofits, but they all started as kind of a community group that just kind of got together thinking about domestic anti-violence work. And so I've already met with the leadership and kind of spoke with the leadership of both of those agencies. So it's not a reinvention of the wheel, but it's kind of doing it for our community.
So you're just learning from what they've accomplished
Right.
and what's working and what's
Right.
not working. So
And they've done some great things in those communities. So.
yeah, such as.
So I know when I was involved with the Wakefield Alliance Against Violence, they've started to take on some community advocacy things around something called the White Ribbon Campaign, which is a campaign focused on men taking a stand against domestic violence, against violence. They've done some funding around. They actually did this really cool fundraising around. It was like an alternative. It was like alternative post prom thing for their students. So instead of like going to parties, or whatever, they funded like this really cool kind of after party for prom, which was really an inventive way, I thought, of spending some money and thinking about being really really good at thinking outside the box when it comes to anti-violence work.
So we've been flashing your telephone number up here on the screen as part of us. And what's a good time to contact you if somebody's got a concern or a problem?
Yeah, so I think it's been saying it's a non-emergency number, and so if there is an emergency, if someone's frightened by the situation that's happening, they should certainly call 911.
Yeah.
And so my office hours are 8 in the morning to about 3:30. And so that would be the best time.
So you're
Monday
Monday through Friday. Yeah.
And that'd be the best time to reach out. If for some reason I'm at court or something, leave me a message. I get back in touch with people within, I would say, like a 24-hour period, so pretty quickly.
Okay, good. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate you stopping by.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, and I wish you the best of. Actually, I wish you had nothing to do. That would be the better part of it.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
I understand that. So,
And
thank you.
ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening. And as I mentioned, if you got a comment, my email address shows up after the credits. And if you got a longer comment, there's always room for you here at the table. So stay tuned. We'll be back.